Everybody. On last class, we talked about the basics of, using Adobe Animate to draw. We talked about the drawing tools, like the brush tool. We talked about the differences between shapes and drawing objects and symbol and primitives and things like that. Today, we're just going to talk about basic ideas of drawing. Okay, so part of doing good 2D animation is having a background with drawing. I know from the survey I sent out that most of you at least have some background with drawing, which is great. Today, we're just going to kind of go over some basics of just thinking about things like space and character design, and we're going to sort of do it from the context of Adobe Animate, but these are not specific to Adobe Animate. You could use these concepts in any form of drawing, whether, with pencils or other drawing programs like Procreate or whatever you want to do. So today's going to be about drawing specifically. This is to help you with the homework, the character background that I signed in the last module. I have this little book here that I kind of recommend you look over. It's How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. And although it's kind of based more on comics and less about animation, a lot of the drawing concepts kind of can be used. So this is written by Stan Lee. I want to say it's from the 80s. Might be a little bit off, but it kind of, it talks about sort of drawing basics like perspective and composition and stuff like that. It's very kind of overview. I'd be lying if I said it got super deep, but it's a good kind of starting place, I think, especially if you want to sort of draw in a more of a comic way as opposed to a more realistic kind of manner of drawing. All right, so let's talk about drawing. Drawing is a fundamental of two-dimensional drawing. This is typically referred to as solid drawing. Now let's talk about the idea of space. Okay, so in most animations there has to be a sense of space. Where do things exist? Even me right now, it's like if you look at the video of me, you see me, I'm in front, and then there's like this environment around me, right? There's my room, my office, right? And it's behind me, and there's lots of ways we can talk about how we know where things are and things like that. And that is the concept of space. It's not about how bright or dark something is, that's tone. It's not about the colors. It's about where do things exist spatially to each other. Okay. So, for a long time, artists and designers have been using different techniques to create depth. Okay. Especially even in two-dimensional form, which is what we're dealing with. Some of those include overlapping, scale, focus, and perspective. All right, so we'll talk about the first three here in this video. First is overlapping, which is literally that you have an object in front or overlapping another object. Okay, so in this design, which is pretty much made entirely out of ovals, and you could probably make this in Animate really quickly. It's like, how do we know that this top oval here, how do we know that it's in front? Well, because it's overlapping all of the other ones, right? So by having it literally in front of or overlapping, we are creating a basic sense of depth. We know that, it's sort of the process of, there's something in math where it's like, well, if A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then we can deduce that A is bigger than C. This is called the transitory property in math. Well, we know that this is behind this, right? Because of overlapping. And we know this is on top of this. Therefore, we know that this is on top of this. Okay. Does that kind of make sense? So it's like by having objects overlapping, we create a sense of depth. So this one, here it's like this yellow bit is in front of this kind of magenta bit here, right? we can see that this part is behind this one. That has also to do with the shadow going on here. We can tell that this is in front of this. So once again, overlap. Same thing here, even though there's a lot of like, there's kind of some semi-transparency going on, which makes it, excuse me, a little bit harder to tell. We can kind of look at this and be like, all right, this this sort of blue feather excuse me, is in front of, these objects here. But this object, this sort of magenta one, which is about here, is in front of this. So, it's once again, it's this is in front of this. This is, excuse me, maybe too much dust in here. But, we're kind of using transitory property to be like, all right, this is in front of this. This might be in front of this, therefore this is in front of this. It creates like a very rudimentary sense of depth. Another way to do this is with scale. Scale just like literally means how large an object is. Once again, as humans, we're always kind of comparing one thing to another thing. So we are comparing the height of these characters here with the characters in the background, which in this case are much smaller in height, like physical. Like if you were to measure this on a painting, it's like, much smaller. Okay. Now it could be that the people here are, 3 inches tall and these people are like 6 feet tall. But our minds go, well, if something is smaller, it's probably in the distance, it's in a spatial distance behind. Okay. So is it possible they're just really small? Yeah, it's possible. But our mind kind of goes, it's more likely that they're in a spatial distance behind us. Same thing kind of here. We have these characters. And then we have this guy here who's in the back, and he's much smaller than these lines here. So we kind of deduce, okay, this guy there must be a spatial distance between these characters and this character. Another way to do this is with focus. Okay. This is one of these things that doesn't exist in real life. It only exists in technology. Okay. What I mean by that is if we look at this photo here, here's a man's hand holding this pole, and there's another character on the other side of the street, and this character is also holding a pole. And we sort of deduce that there is a spatial distance between these characters here, right? Now, why do we deduce this? Well, this character is out of focus, okay? Now, in real life, you do not see things out of focus unless you're having some vision problems, okay? But the way this happens is when you look through a camera, the way that your camera works with its lens, the lens cannot focus on what's in the foreground and what's in the background at the same time. It's a limitation of the camera. This doesn't happen with your eye because your eye is not a camera, okay? But because, when we look at photos are taken with cameras, right? That's how we see them. So therefore, we sort of go, okay, this character is out of focus. That must mean that that character is in a spatial distance behind the objects that are in focus, okay? This is kind of one of these kind of technological understandings. Same thing's kind of happening here. This is from Toy Story 4. And once again, it's the same thing. It's like, here's Bo Peep and Woody. So we're sort of deducing that there's a spatial distance between Bo Peep and Woody because Woody is out of focus. Now he's closer to the camera. So once again, the camera can't focus on the foreground and the background at the same time. So we're sort of deducing like, okay, Woody is in the spatial distance closer to us, and then Bo Peep is in the spatial distance back. So it's like, this is kind of how it is, okay? Now, how can I do this in Adobe Animate? Glad you asked. So, excuse me. All right, so right now I have 3 squares, right? And they're all the same size and they're all the same shape. So I'm going to try to create a sense of faux space, faux depth. So what I'm going to do is, okay, why don't we use the overlapping method? So if I take this object and I put it on top of this object, I created a rudimentary sense of depth. I take this and I do that. Once again, now they're still flat. They don't have, these are flat squares. They're 2-dimensional. They don't have any depth to them. Like they don't have a thickness in the way that this is a square, but it has thickness, right? But these squares don't have that because there is no sense of depth. But, by simply placing them on top of each other like that, I've created a faux sense of depth, okay? And if I want, I could play around with which is in front of which. So if I wanted this one to be in front of this one, you can use if they're all in the same layer, you can use arrange. And I can use the arrange, bring to front or bring backwards, and this would allow me to sort of place one item in front of another item like that. Maybe I want this one to be in front, so arrange, bring forward or bring to front. Okay, so now I've kind of reversed the depth here. Another way to do this is I'm going to put them all in the same line and not overlap them. But what I'm going to do is use the free transform tool we talked about before, and I'm going to scale that so it's smaller. Okay. And so by doing that, I've created the sense of depth. We sort of go, these objects are really large, so they're probably closer to us. This object is very small. Now, it could be that it's just very small and it's, in this case, floating in the air. But our mind goes, it's probably small because it's further in the distance. Okay. So that's how we can, create a very basic sense of depth. Okay. When we learn more about symbols, we can actually apply a blur. It's not default to animate, but you can apply a blur if you want to create a sense of, and that would help create that sense of focus I was talking about, where you can have objects out of focus. And if an object is out of focus, we assume it's further back. Okay. In the next video, I'm going to talk about perspective, which is another way to create space, okay? This one's going to take a little bit longer, so that's why I'm going to break this up, but we can use perspective, and we'll talk about different types of perspectives and just do some very basic drawing with perspective to create a sense of depth or space with our objects.